Welcome to another presentation from the Filmmakers Legal Clinic at Cardozo Law School. The Filmmakers Legal Clinic at Cardozo Law School provides free legal services to filmmakers and video journalists who are seeking to move the social justice needle. We also provide educational programs and trainings for industry partners. It's important to understand the types of contracts generally used by independent filmmakers. Today, we'll discuss operating agreements. Operating agreements can be extremely useful for filmmakers who decide that an LLC is the best business structure to fit their needs, as opposed to a sole proprietorship, partnership, corporation, or other entity. Next, here's a brief overview of what we'll cover today. First, we'll discuss what an operating agreement is. Next, we'll talk about who should enter into an operating agreement. Then, we'll cover when, where, and how to enter into an operating agreement for your LLC. Then we'll discuss why it's important to enter into operating agreement, whether it's required or not. Then we'll discuss other considerations, drafting an operating agreement, and we'll recommend some best practices. Finally, we'll wrap up. So, what is an operating agreement? Operating agreements are a foundational document for LLCs and their members. They serve the purpose of outlining the rules and regulations that will govern the corresponding business. Operating agreements often include an outline of various business processes and internal affairs, with provisions dictating member ownership percentages, the duties and powers of members or other actors, the distribution of finances, and other various affairs related to the entity and the needs and goals of its members. Speaking of members, let's move on to our next topic. Now, we'll discuss who enters into operating agreements and who the agreements govern. The provisions in an operating agreement are binding to the members of the corresponding LLC, and the members will be clearly identified in an operating agreement. So, who can form an LLC governed by an operating agreement? The short answer is anyone. Individuals may choose to organize an LLC for various business needs and in various industries, so long as they have a lawful business purpose. In the independent film industry, producers, directors, investors, and others who are working together closely on a particular film may choose to be joint members of an LLC, and they'll likely have some say as to the content of their corresponding operating agreement. Even if you haven't yet rallied a cast or crew, or if you prefer to work alone, you can still form an LLC as a sole member, and an operating agreement will still be very valuable to you. Remember, you and the LLC are separate legal entities, even if you're a sole member. The operating agreement would govern the LLC and your relationship to it. Now, let's go over when you'll enter an operating agreement, where it's appropriate to do so, and how to form an LLC governed by an operating agreement. So when should you enter an operating agreement? Generally speaking, the earlier the better. More on this later. You can form an LLC by preparing, preferably with the help of a professional, signing, and then filing articles of organization with the Department of State in the state where you'll register. Requirements do vary by state. Some states require that LLC members enter into an operating agreement and subsequently file that agreement with the state, either as part of the initial LLC application or as a separate filing shortly thereafter. Even if a particular state doesn't require LLC members to have an operating agreement, there are many reasons why you, especially if you're a filmmaker, may consider doing so. And remember, even if a state doesn't require an LLC to have an operating agreement, once all of the members of an LLC sign the agreement, it becomes an officially binding contract, regardless of state requirements. Also, filmmakers will probably want to consult tax and legal professionals when drafting an operating agreement. Don't forget, filmmakers can apply for free legal services through the Filmmakers Legal Clinic and receive assistance with drafting an operating agreement for their LLC. Next, we'll discuss why you would choose to enter an operating agreement, especially if it's not required in the state which you're filing. If you've watched the clinic's videos on copyright, you know that owning a copyright gives you access to exclusive rights to reproduce, distribute, and recreate your particular creative work. Let's say a feature film, for example. There are a number of reasons that a copyright owner may choose to transfer ownership of the copyright in their film to an LLC governed by an operating agreement. The first is protection. An LLC offers a valuable asset to filmmakers, limited liability. Yes, it's in the name. Filmmakers can protect their personal property, including money, homes, your car, heirlooms, and other valuable assets, to avoid facing personal liability if their LLC ever comes upon financial or legal hardships. Independent filmmakers, especially documentarians, often face practical barriers while fundraising and working with generally smaller budgets. Forming an LLC governed by a thorough operating agreement can provide peace of mind that will allow filmmakers to focus on bringing their creative vision to fruition without worrying that a mistake may cost them their most valuable personal assets. Relatedly, remember when we discussed how there are different filing requirements in different states? Well, LLCs can also have limited life in many states. When a member joins or leaves an LLC, some states may require the LLC to be dissolved and reformed with new membership, unless there's already an operating agreement in place within the LLC for buying, selling, and transferring ownership. Again, it's in the interest of any LLC member to become familiar, or at least seek the help of someone who is, with state laws and how an operating agreement might help you and your business navigate different laws and regulations. Keep in mind that a limited number of states require members to enter into operating agreements, so be sure to check the requirements of the state in which you wish to form your LLC. However, even in states where you aren't required to enter an operating agreement, failing to do so may put your business at risk. Your business will become subject to state default rules, which will govern the internal affairs of your business. For those who would rather write their own rules, a carefully crafted operating agreement will allow you to customize your business processes to your needs and the needs of your film. Lastly, this will help you expedite necessary processes. Small, independent filmmakers often begin working on a project together before negotiating important terms like credit, how ownership of the film and associated intellectual property should be divided among the collaborators, and other things. Prioritizing the drafting of an operating agreement can give you the chance to have the sometimes difficult but necessary conversations about compensation, ownership, and other important considerations for collaborating filmmakers. Remember earlier we said the earlier you can formulate an LLC and enter an operating agreement, the better. As you can see, you'll want all of these benefits and protections as soon as possible. Now, here are some other things to consider when forming your LLC and drafting your operating agreement. Members of an LLC are considered self-employed and must pay self-employment tax contributions toward Medicare and Social Security, though your tax rate will likely still be lower than if you formed a corporation or other business entity. It's important to remember you still have to pay taxes. Now that we've built a foundation, let's talk about drafting an operating agreement. Let's put all this information into context by reviewing some of the provisions you'll probably want to include when drafting an operating agreement for your LLC. First, you'll want to include your company name, address, and principal place of business. Next, the purpose of the LLC. Remember, you're legally required to have a legitimate business purpose. It's worth pausing here to give some additional practice advice on drafting an LLC's purpose and setting up your entities as a filmmaker. First, it matters how you draft what your purpose in your operating agreement is. If you articulate a broad purpose for your company using less restrictive language, then you'll be less restricted in how you choose to use and operate your company. A narrower purpose, such as to make X film, may be best in other situations. More to come on this later. You may also include what's called a distributive share, which consists of a plan for allocating income, losses, credits, and deductions amongst the LLC members. Additionally, operating agreements usually include a structure of management. An LLC can be managed by a single member, more than one member, or non-members. These provisions will outline who manages the LLC and provide information on the decision-making power of each of the members and the manager or managers. While on the subject of power, an operating agreement may also include a section outlining both the ownership share and the voting rights of each of the members. Other rights and responsibilities of each member, including identifying which members will be authorized to sign legally binding documents for the LLC, should be included. An operating agreement may also outline how frequently the members will have official meetings. Additionally, an operating agreement should also include provisions dictating what will happen if a member leaves and how to dissolve the entity. In addition to contemplating its own demise, an operating agreement should also provide processes for how new members will be added to an LLC. So, we've discussed how things can change, and your business needs may shift over time. Because you may not be able to predict how future business circumstances may shift business priorities, it's best to provide a section on how the operating agreement can be amended. Of course, not all these provisions are required to be included in every operating agreement. What you include in your agreement will be dictated by the circumstances and the needs of your entity. Now, we'll quickly run through some best practices which we at the Filmmakers Legal Clinic recommend to many of our independent filmmaker clients. For many independent filmmakers, we suggest they form an LLC for their production company with a more general purpose. We then recommend that they form individual LLCs for each of their individual films or projects, being sure to file with their production company as a controlling member of the entity. This will ensure that each of your films, with all of their separate assets and liabilities, exist as separate institutions. That way, if one of your films experiences some legal troubles or financial losses, those issues won't bleed into another one of your projects. With all of your films separately coexisting under the control of your production company, which is controlled by you, you'll be equipped as a filmmaker to protect yourself, your production company, and your individual films from unnecessary liability. Finally, let's wrap up. If you have questions about operating agreements or any other questions, please contact us. We're committed to building a community of empowered creatives who can protect their own work and create a more thoughtful, just, and ethical industry. If you're an independent filmmaker looking for additional legal assistance, you can apply to become a client of the Cardozo Filmmakers Legal Clinic. Also, feel free to follow us on social media. Thank you for viewing our presentation on operating agreements as part of our Contracts and Agreements series. This has been a presentation from the Filmmakers Legal Clinic, providing independent filmmakers access to free legal services through the Center for Visual Advocacy at the Benjamin N. Cardozo School of Law. Please check back with us periodically for new modules.